Improve your English through stories. Young people like Ella should be given opportunities in life, especially the chance for a good education. Sometimes, that means studying in another country far from home and family. Currently, Ella is at school in New Zealand, but her home is on a South Sea island where the warm waters of the lagoon are as blue as the sky above. On June 20th, Liam decides to use a big notebook for her diary, jotting down everything she feels and does. She brought the book from home, previously used for English at her school there, with plenty of unwritten pages, making it perfect for a diary. Back at home, Ella read a story called The Diary of Anne Frank, a sad tale that she read multiple times. Anne Frank mentioned it made her feel better to write things down, helping her cope with troubles. Perhaps, Ella's own diary will have a similar effect and make her feel better too. Tomorrow marks 2 months since Ella left home to come here 61 days. Though just 2 numbers, these days seem to pass incredibly slowly. She still thinks of home all the time, remembering every little detail about the island except for its warmth, a sensation absent in the constant cold of her current surroundings. Despite the cold, when Ella lies down and closes her eyes, she can vividly see her friends, family, and all her favorite places, the big black rock where they swam in the lagoon, and the path leading to the top of their mountain with the cool wind at the summit. If she ever struggles to recall everything, there are photos by her bed and seashells, remnants of her babyhood. She reminisces about being given to her grandparents when she was a baby, as per their custom for the youngest in the family. Her real parents live on another island, in a village called Vipaka. Their house is slightly back from the road that passes through the village by the hill. Ella recalls the last big storm named Sharon, where the waves from the lagoon reached over the road, but luckily spared their garden. The wind, however, blew all the flowers away. Reflecting on the village, Ella acknowledges there were some bad occurrences, like the storm and motorcycle accidents, but mostly, there were good things that she chooses to remember. School was good too. She enjoyed her time at the college, often ranking at the top of her class. Though, she expresses regret now, thinking that perhaps her academic success contributed to her being sent away. In the first term exams, she consistently secured the first or second position. Mr. Ashton, the teacher, came to their house in the evening. He spoke to her parents expressing that the island school wasn't good enough for her, and that she should attend school in New Zealand. Ella's parents discussed it with Uncle George. Ella was worried because she didn't want to go away, but they had further discussions with Mr. Ashton, and eventually, all her family contributed some money for the plane, sending her there. She arrived at Auntie Vane's house on June 25th. Auntie Vane, her mother's cousin, has been living in Auckland for over 20 years. In her house, there are 4 of them: Auntie Ta, who is 17, Marlene, and her. Marlene and she sleep in the same bedroom. Marlene is 6. The week after she arrived, Auntie bought her a uniform, and she started at the girls' college. She has to pause her diary now because the video has finished, and Marlene wants to go to bed. Initially, Auntie was friendly. She asked her all about home and all the relations she hadn't seen for so long. Auntie shared stories from her girlhood on the island. Then she asked how much money she brought with her from the island, and she said she didn't bring any. They informed her that Auntie had a good job and earned plenty of money. Auntie mentioned she worked in the chicken factory, but she didn't get much money, and most of it went into paying the rent for the house. Then she asked Auntie about her uncle. She hesitated at first because she thought maybe he had left her or something. Auntie started crying and told her about the accident. Uncle Ben worked for a building company that made bridges, and one day a very long, heavy piece of metal fell on him, breaking his back. He died in the hospital. She expressed her sorrow, mentioning that nobody at home heard about it. Auntie explained that Uncle Ben was from Nui, so she only informed his family. She felt really sad for Auntie and guilty that she came to live with her when she didn't have enough money. As of July 1st, she hasn't been able to write in her diary recently due to too much schoolwork. School is challenging here, but the teachers are nice. Mrs. Price, her class teacher, is the best. She introduced her to lots of girls, but they weren't from her island. They're Samoans, and their language is very strange to her. The school is so big, with over 1,000 girls and so many rooms, making it scary for someone like Ella who is not used to being around so many strangers. Everyone seems cleverer than her, and their English is so good. She tries hard to keep up but gets much lower marks than she did at home. The lack of time to do her work becomes a significant challenge. The trouble deepens as Auntie is working evenings at the chicken factory, and she has to prepare dinner every night. The only place she can find to study is in her bedroom, but the noise from Tara's videos, always filled with shooting and shouting, particularly from Sylvester Stallone, makes it difficult. She believes it's bad for Tara to watch such videos. Marlene also contributes to the noise. Yesterday, she asked him to turn the volume down so she could study in her room, but he got angry and shouted bad words at her. She finds his behavior amusing, considering him just a stupid boy who can't get a job. Despite her request, he refuses to turn down the video. On July 10th, she didn't go to school because the bus ticket cost a lot of money, and Auntie said she didn't have any left. In frustration, she decides to walk to school the next day instead of taking the bus. Attempting to do her schoolwork at home, she didn't do very well. July 11th arrives, and she's very tired. Getting up at 6 o'clock, she makes some sandwiches for lunch, leaving before anyone else is up. It's still dark, and the empty streets are scary. Walking down Dominion Road, she struggles to remember the way the bus went when she had a ticket. Eventually, she gets to school, but it takes a long time, and she arrives late. The teacher at the gate takes her name, and she receives a detention, the first time ever. Mrs. Price, her class teacher, asks why she was late, but she doesn't want to say that Auntie didn't have money for the bus. So, she said she slipped when Mrs. Price asked how she was getting on here. Mrs. Price seemed a bit worried. During lunchtime, Mrs. Price brought a fifth-form girl named Moana, who was from her country, to see her. Moana and she talked in their language, and even though Moana didn't come from her island, she knew some of Moana's cousins. The conversation with Moana was enjoyable, but it made her sad as she started thinking about home. When she told Moana about walking to school, Moana took her to the school library and showed her a street map. They discovered a much shorter way for her to come to school without following the bus route. Moana asked if she would like to come to her place one day, but looking at the map, she realized it was too far away from her home. She walked home following the quick route she found on the map, but due to her detention, she didn't get home until 6 o'clock, feeling very tired. On July 12th, Auntie gave her $2 in the morning, forcing her to decide whether to spend it on the bus fare or some lunch. Because there was only fried bananas for breakfast and Auntie didn't get paid until tomorrow, she chose to walk to school and buy lunch. On the way, she saw a pedestrian bridge over the motorway and looked down at the flowing cars, resembling a great river running into the city. Suddenly, it started raining heavily, like it does at home but much colder. She got wet through, and without a coat or jacket, she became very cold. Seeing a clock that said 5 minutes to 9, realizing it was too late for school, she turned around and walked back home. She was so cold that she had to get into bed to keep warm and didn't get up until Marlene came home from school. On July 13th, Auntie was working during the daytime at the factory, so she told Marlene and Ella to stay home from school and do the shopping. They walked to the supermarket, and after finishing the shopping, they had some money left over. Feeling hungry, she bought some Kentucky Fried Chicken for lunch. They took the chicken to the park to eat it, but people passing by stared at them, possibly thinking why those girls weren't at school. Feeling uneasy, she told Marlene they should go home, feeling bad about using Auntie's money for Kentucky Fried Chicken. She told Marlene not to mention it. However, she regretted the decision and went to bed in the afternoon, feeling unwell with headaches and suspecting a cold. Skipping ahead to July 18th, she hadn't written in her diary for a few days as she stayed in bed with a severe cold, feeling miserable and missing a lot of school. Exams were approaching the next month, causing her considerable worry. Despite doing well in exams back home, catching up here seemed challenging. She spent her time lying in bed, staring at photos and a trochus shell her father gave her. Putting the shell to her ear, she could hear the lagoon whispering to her. The trochus shells were significant in their culture, polished for tourists, but her father polished this one just for her, making it a beautiful, colorful piece resembling a rainbow. On July 19th, she had a terrible day. Despite waking up with the determination to go to school and catch up on her work, Auntie's response to her request for money for lunch turned out to be a furious outburst. Auntie shouted that she had no money left for her, not even enough for her own children, and questioned why she had come here in the first place. Feeling cornered, she expressed her desire to go home, making Auntie angrier, claiming she didn't have money for the bus, let alone a plane ticket. Auntie accused her family of sending her here without sufficient funds and insisted that if she wanted to go home, her family should send money. Feeling miserable, she ran out of the room crying, expressing her discomfort with the emphasis on money in this new environment. Everything revolves around money, and she worries about Auntie having to get more because of her. Feeling helpless without a telephone to contact home, she spends her time lying in bed, staring at photos, and holding her trochus shell. On July 20th, it's raining again, and she decides not to go to school. Instead, she does some cleaning in the house and watches TV. There's a knock on the door, but she doesn't answer. Later, she retrieves a letter that was addressed to Auntie. On July 21st, she opens a letter addressed to Auntie, stating that Auntie should visit the school immediately because she hasn't been attending. Worried about Auntie getting mad, she decides to discard the letter. Acknowledging that not attending school is against the law, she contemplates leaving school to get a job in an office to assist Auntie financially. On the same day, Tar gives her money for the bus, guiding her on how to get downtown. She catches the bus and arrives at Queen Street, where she experiences a bustling city environment for the first time. Despite the cold wind and rain, she walks up Queen Street, captivated by the grand buildings and shop windows displaying enticing items. Stopping at a shop with holiday advertisements, she sees a beautiful photograph of her island, wishing people would notice its beauty. As she continues walking, the cold becomes unbearable, prompting her to search for a clothes shop. In a large shop, feeling uncomfortable under the shopkeeper's gaze, she exits and finds another shop selling jackets. Desperate for warmth, she makes a regrettable decision, stealing a blue jacket by quickly placing it in a supermarket bag. Nervously, she pretends to look at other coats before leaving the shop. It's only when she reaches the bridge over the motorway that she checks the price tag on the stolen jacket, $125. Despite the guilt, she puts it on and feels the warmth. On July 25th, she decides to return the stolen jacket to the shop. Putting it in her school bag, she tells Auntie that she's going to school, and on the way, waits until after 9 o'clock to approach the shop. Inside the shop, she heads to the jacket section, intending to return it. As she starts to take the jacket out of her bag, she notices a lady with gray hair watching her from across some dresses. The lady approaches her, questioning her actions with a cross tone, asking if she took the jacket. Ella is faced with a challenging situation, as it seems to be reaching a critical moment. The police lady finds our narrator telling the truth and suggests talking to someone from the school. The man, still looking cross, agrees, acknowledging that it's an unusual situation. The police lady then mentions she has never heard of a shoplifter who took the goods back. It seems like the story is taking an unexpected turn, introducing a unique perspective on the act of shoplifting. Returning the jacket, she smiled at me and asked, "Who would you like us to talk to from school?" When Mrs. Thompson came in, she looked just as usual, not worried or anything. But she started crying again because she was so ashamed. Mrs. Thompson sat down next to her and assured her not to worry as everything would be fine. Then she and the police lady talked, and they seemed really friendly to each other. I don't think the shop manager liked that, and he still looked angry. Mrs. Thompson asked her why she hadn't been to school. She has gray hair, but her face is young, and she talks in a very kind way. She told Mrs. Thompson about the money, Auntie, and her uncle, and how he was killed, and about the exams and how she was worried about them, and how she got cold when she went out and how she took the jacket. She said she was very ashamed of what she did. Mrs. Thompson looked at the police lady, and then they both looked at the manager. The police lady said, "The jacket has been returned, and I really don't think this girl is a thief." The manager didn't look at her, but he nodded his head. She told him that she was very sorry she had taken his jacket and assured him that she would never do it again. He stood up and nodded once more. Mrs. Thompson then mentioned that she would take her home. Both Mrs. Thompson and she sat in her car outside her house. Mrs. Thompson spoke slowly, expressing that she was contemplating everything deeply. She mentioned, "We can give you extra lessons at school to help you catch up, and I'll find out if your auntie can get some money from the government. I'm sure she can. That will help with the clothes problem." Later, Mrs. Thompson paused, gazing at her for a long time without speaking. She noted that Mrs. Thompson has very clear gray eyes, very kind and understanding, and her eyes seem to see a long way into her. In a slow voice, she said, "Would you just like us to arrange for you to go home?" Looking back into those gray kind eyes, she sensed that it was really possible. Tears came back into her eyes. Through them, she saw a house, faces, and the lagoon shining and blue. She expressed, "I would like to go home."